What? Hello. So I'm going to try something a little bit different here. I'm going to share this YouTube video with you through this my own YouTube or Screencastify. But I do this every year in class for a couple of reasons. This is uh, a short lecture, an end of a lecture by Professor David Blight at Yale University. And there's a couple of reasons why I use this clip. First, it has some great content in it that I'm going to be giving you a couple of questions in the discussion that you're going to have to answer. But the other reason is just to give you an idea, and I find this to be true of the typical history professor at college. So one of the big things that I remember at Ohio State when I first got there and we had to take this, it's called freshman early experience class or whatever about, just how to be a college student. One of the big things that they said is, as they ask us, what is the number one job of college professors? So of course, being naive and thinking that we're there to learn, we all raised our hand and said that, the number one job of a college professor is to teach. And they let us know under every way possible that that's not the case. That the number one job of a college professor is to write and to research, to bring grant money and to bring students into this university because you want to study under one of these great professors. And so you get a little idea here about Professor Blight and how he goes about his business. So it's comical in some ways. It's very informative in others. As you watch this, I want you to take down and jot down a few notes about this that I'm going to ask you to answer in our discussion questions at the end of this that I will post on Schoology. But I want you to think about, as you take your notes, about what his assessment of Reconstruction is, what it should be, what the presidential Reconstruction should, what they want it to be, what the radicals want it to be, and in the end, what the radical Republicans think society should be at the following this whole event. So, without further ado, here's Dr. Blight.
Now, Reconstruction is, of course, that 10 or 11 year period of American history that sometimes, too often, I don't know how it was taught to you, but sometimes, too often, we skirt through. It's complicated. Not as much glory to go around as there is during the war. It's fraught with some skullduggery and corruption on an unprecedented scale on all kinds of sides. It's a time of enormous imagination and experimentation in politics and law. It's also the time in American history when we had by far our largest level of domestic terrorism and violence. Good deal more on that in the weeks to come. But Reconstruction policy, of course, began during the war. The debates over Reconstruction policy began during the war. And it is, one second, excuse me. Don't you hate that? Now, what did I do? Well, sorry. I had Herman Melville's poem here. But what did I do with Herman Melville? Forgive me. Check that, as the old sports announcer used to say. The policies on Reconstruction took two paths. And those paths begin as early as late 1863, and they are especially being debated in the federal government in 1864, and they are ripe by the end of the war in 1865. Lincoln's basic approach to Reconstruction, when and if they could end the war, win the war, and stop it, was to make Reconstruction as fast as possible, as lenient as possible. Remember these three things, you're going to hear it again. As fast as possible, as lenient as possible, and as much as possible under presidential authority, not Congress.
So that's the big key. So for Lincoln, he wants this to be quick, he wants it to be lenient, and he wants it to be under his authority. And the big key question that is going to be so important for us as we go through and answer this is, did the states actually ever leave the Union To Abraham Lincoln, the answer is no, that they were in rebellion. There was no official declaration of war against the Confederacy, that this was all about putting down a rebellion that the president has under his authority as commander in chief. And so, as a result of this, if he says that they left the Union, only the Congress can readmit them back because Congress has that constitutional authority to readmit these states back into the Union. So he wants to get this done quickly before they all come back and try to challenge this. Now, he's not going to be around, of course, for this fight, and Johnson is going to be.
He's going to fashion his so-called 10% plan, which I'll explain next time, but it in essence meant that he wanted 10% of the white voting population of a former Confederate state to take a loyalty oath to the Union, to redraw a new constitution, denounce secession, accept emancipation, and they would be readmitted to the Union under presidential authority. And he wanted to do as much of it as possible during the war, because when the war ends, he could lose his presidential war powers. In Congress, in his own party, led by Thaddeus Stevens in the House and Charles Sumner in the Senate, and you'll learn a good deal more about them in 2 weeks to come, there's a very different approach to Reconstruction. The congressional radicals, as they become known, Republicans all, want a Reconstruction that is longer, harsher, and under congressional control.
So there's the opposite, obviously, longer, harsher, and under their control, because they believe that the states did leave the Union. So therefore, they have to reapply for statehood. They would have to rewrite a constitution, send that constitution to Washington, D.C., where it would be voted and ratified. And then those states would be admitted back into the Union.
Now, Lincoln won't be around, of course, to engage in this battle after the war is over, but he was there during the war, and they had quite a tussle over imagining how Reconstruction would happen. Now, if you want to get a sense of Lincoln's approach to Reconstruction, you can read the last paragraph of the second inaugural about malice toward none and charity for all and binding up the nation's wound and so forth. But there's also the statement he made in his last cabinet meeting. The last meeting he had of his cabinet before he went to Ford's Theater, literally that night. He said to his cabinet, I'm quoting, "I hope that there will be no persecutions, no bloody work after the war is over. No one need expect me to take any part in hanging or killing these men, even the worst of them. Frighten them out of the country, open the gates, let down the bars, scare them off. But enough lives have been sacrificed." That's one approach. But that is not the approach of the leaders of the congressional Republicans, some of whom would have wished for there to be some treason trials and executions. But short of that, they want a Reconstruction that's going to reshape the American polity, rewrite the U.S. Constitution, and remake Southern society.
So there's the three keys that he talked about there of what do the radical Republicans want to do. They want to reshape the American polity. And what this means is those who can vote. They want to rewrite the U.S. Constitution. We're going to see this through the amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. And they want to remake Southern society. They will only be partially successful on the first one. They'll be completely successful on the second one. And I would argue that they're not successful at all on reshaping Southern society.
Anyone I ever run into who says Reconstruction is too complicated and not interesting, I don't understand it. Because how can you have that kind of thing happening and it not be interesting? But, found Melville, sorry. Let me leave you with this. Spare the poets.
So this is the poem by Melville, the Martyr, which I was hoping some of you would use. Very few of you did, but this is an incredible poem, and listen to what he has to say at the end.
Melville wrote this little poem after Lincoln was murdered. Listen to what he says. Good Friday was the day of the prodigy in crime, when they killed him in his pity, when they killed him in his prime. Of clemency and calm, when with yearning he was filled, to redeem the evil willed. And though conqueror, be kind. But they killed him in his kindness, in their madness and their blindness, and they killed him from behind. There is sobbing of the strong, and a pall upon the land. But the people in their weeping bear an iron hand. Beware the people weeping, and they bear the iron hand. He lieth in his blood, the Father in his face. They have killed him, the forgiver. The avenger now takes his place. The avenger wisely stern, who in righteousness shall do what the heavens call him to. And the parricides remand, for they killed him in his kindness, in their madness and their blindness, and his blood is on their hand. There is sobbing of the strong, and a pall upon the land, but the people in their weeping bear the iron hand. Beware the people weeping, when they bear an iron hand. The whole history of Reconstruction has always been a debate, really, over how iron the hand should have been. Thank you. See?
So when Melville talks about the Avenger, he's not talking about Johnson. He's talking about the people of the United States. And I think that's an important distinction. Melville didn't know how Johnson was going to approach this. So this is about vengeance, that the blood is on the hands of the South for John Wilkes Booth's actions, and that it's going to be this iron hand that's going to punish the South. And of course, as we're going to find out, that's not exactly the truth.